Mark and Elaine have opened up with here this morning. I think these are excellent over here. There's just 7 of them. Just the word itself, as Terry mentioned, mastery, has a good sound, doesn't it? Maybe I could just put it down just to keep it in front of it. If one is experiencing mastery, of course, there's a fulfilling of all of these other aspects here. Now, because human beings have not known how to handle their emotions, and in consciousness they're not in the present, and they certainly have not allowed integration of their MBS, and mind, body, and spirit, emotions, and they do not feel in control of events. A master creates events. He's the author, or she's the author of events. They're not just going to handle these events that come. It's because of their living that they create the event that takes place. And of course, when mastery is known, there is balance. You know, it's an interesting thing about balance. One finds and experiences a state of balance because they're moving with life's pulsations. As an example, when I walk, actually, I'm in a state of imbalance. But because I'm moving, there's a state of balance. But if I was to stop and stay right there, I'd topple over, as human beings find their experience toppling over. But because they're moving, there's a state of balance. Because there's been an immature growth pattern in consciousness, human beings are not experiencing mastery. It is, you can say it, oh my, it's mystery. I think somewhere in the book of Revelation it speaks about the mystery of God being finished. God has been a mystery. Well, the mystery of God is finished when you know your own mastery. When you know mastery, then the mystery is no longer. Look how easy it is to get rid of the mystery. Mastery. Now, some of you I know were not with us Monday night when I began to develop a particular theme. And I thought, just to pull in the threads of what we were doing Monday night, I might recapitulate a little bit so that we can begin to take off from there. This particular card is beautiful. Be willing to let yourself be happy, joyous, and gloriously successful. Now, I'm sure human beings in the mystery state have all sorts of concepts as to what constitutes success. And usually they try to go get it. And the fact that they're trying to get success shows that they will never attain success, because success, in order to be known, doesn't have to be gotten. One needs to live properly, effectively, and in that effective living, one knows success. This morning, I stopped on the way down to buy and share with you a gloriously acceptable revelation. That's success. It's complete. Right? Everything worked out to bring the fulfillment of this tomato. I would suggest that it'll find greater fulfillment at noontime. When this particular substance, which was drawn, and remember now, it was life that did this. Life drew all this substance together. And I can imagine if you were there, It looks Mexican. I don't know. It probably comes from Mexico this time of the year, California or something. If you were there to see how this process took place, I don't think you would have heard any grunting going on as the tomato was growing. It was a very easy process which drew together this revelation of a glorious success experience. I think there's something interesting to this too. The other night we quoted from a particular article entitled Managing from Inside Out. Mark was mentioning that if there's going to be true healing, it needs to come from inside out. But this article the other night mentioning the fact that various psychologists throughout history have thought about motivation in a limited way. Freud believed in the basic human motivation is to pleasure. Adler to power. Frankl to meaning. And I would suggest that this is one of these three particular qualities that are dominant qualities in human experience. Human beings are looking for pleasure. Right? And again, the particular concept of pleasure is something that's going to come to me from out here. They're looking for power. We see this in the political arena. Human beings climb over one another, trying to experience power. And certainly, we see a world which is full of meaninglessness. Viktor Frankl, by the way, he noted in this living laboratory of the concentration camps that those who survived in that concentration camp were those who had some sense of meaning. Those who lost the sense of meaning quickly went down the drain. In his own experience, he had a sense of meaning. That's why he came out of it. Even to the point that they were saved, some of them, from the furnace. They got right to the door. And because they had a sense of meaning, they found that events worked out that took away this particular experience of being put in the oven. And the whole thing changed and they didn't get incinerated. All these things worked out. And that's a fact. Just leave the success here. Remind you of it. Now this psychologist, this Wooded that was spoken about in the article, he believes that the basic motivation isn't necessarily to power or to meaning or to pleasure. He said the basic motivation is to being. Being. Human beings are looking to be. Now that first statement here, how to remain in the present. Well, it's absolutely impossible to remain in the present unless one is experiencing being. Experiencing being, you are where being is, because being's right here. I be. Right here. These other questions, particularly the emotional realm, you may forget ever trying to offer control to your emotional realm unless you're having an experience of being. You can't do it. Human beings valiantly try to control their emotions. I'll count to 10. Should have been 30. Because at 11, they blow up. Now, why is this so? What's happened? I mentioned immaturity initially. Now, on this MBS here, I think I'd call it MBM. We have the body. And when you and I are born into the world, you and I are already there. Actually, we are, before this body even takes form, we are. Because in truth, this is what the person is. The person is being. And this being incarnates, the being which you are, it incarnates. In order to express itself on earth, it must have form, must have earth form. I recall some years back being with a mentor of mine, Dr. B.J. Palmer, and it was a question and answer period with the students. And a student asked Dr. Palmer, Dr. Palmer, are there beings on the sun? And he pondered a while and thought, and then he said, yes, there are beings on the sun. And another student said, Dr. Palmer, if there are beings on the sun, what are they made of? Dr. Palmer said, well, the beings on the earth are made of earth, and the beings on the sun are made of sun. Sun beings. We're earth beings. Now, for that being, which we are, in order to have meaning and expression here on earth, it needs the earth. This is the earth. Our particular physical form is composed of earth substance. It's lifted up, just as this. This is something, isn't it, really? I mean, we just take tomatoes for granted and juice them or whatever. But just imagine there was an essence of life in the seed. It was a tomato seed. Right? And the essence of life, which was in that tomato seed, it sent out its lines of force. Its lines of force went out, and it drew all the substance together to make the tomato. Right? The design for the tomato wasn't in the substance, because if you didn't have the seed, you wouldn't have the tomato. The design was in the essence of life that was contained in the seed. And it was this expression of this life essence which brought together the tomato. This form here is taking place in the mother's womb. Here, this is taking place. All kinds of forces are working out. Invisible forces that are at work, or this babe wouldn't be developed. Here they're moving. I'm just amazed sometime when I pick up my radio. This morning, I turned on my little trusty radio, and I picked up Australia. I got Brisbane this morning. I turned around, I got London. And I picked up a program from India. London, Brisbane, Delhi, they were all in my bedroom this morning. All I needed was that particular, I wasn't aware of it till I turned the radio on. I needed that little instrument. Just to become aware, the little instrument properly translated, all those waves are in my room. I would suspect that probably Bombay was there too, and Hong Kong and Calcutta. All these places are all in my bedroom this morning. Isn't it marvelous though when you think of this? I mean, all this stuff in this room here, there's everything. WBZ's in here, and all kinds of stuff is in this room. We just turn on certain equipment, we begin to become aware of various forces that are in this room. Well, this being, which first of all incarnated, we'll say its residence at that time was focused in the womb of the mother, and the lines of force went out from the being and begin to draw together substance, begin to come together in the womb, to begin to develop a form, a babe form, so that this being could express. Now, that form developed to a certain level, and after 9 months, 280 lunar days, they say, the form was born, and we have this little form. And we know that the human form is probably one of the most helpless of any forms, isn't it? You see, and we have a farm up in New Hampshire, and the calf will be born, the little calf, right? Born because of the same force at work, life, being. And the little calf will get up and its legs will kind of buckle under it. But then after a day or two, you go down to the barnyard and there's that little calf running around down there. Yeah, we have babies born in this farm too, human babies. And they get pretty helpless. It takes a lot of care working with them. Right? Because this form is developing, and the form is developing because the being is there. If we were to take the being out of this developing form, of course the form would stop developing. The design for the form is in the being. Now, what is developing, of course, is the human aspect. This is what's developing. This isn't what you are. You're not that. You have that. And if the design which is contained in being, if it works out that design which is inherent there reveals itself here in the human facilities, then the being can begin to express itself as it really is. That would be mastery. Now, the body develops initially first, and then out of the body, another realm begins to reveal itself. We begin to have the realm of the mind, right? The mind begins to develop, right? So the mental processes develop, and it develops, of course, because the body is present, right? As I've often emphasized, you've never seen a mind without a body. I've seen some bodies that you question whether there are minds there. You've never seen a mind without a body. And then, of course, the development takes place. It's there initially, but it's a very unruly thing usually in a child. The emotional realm. And these are various levels of manifestation. And I would suggest that there are various levels, actually, of form. Form. These have form too. There is mental form. The poet speaks of thoughts being things. There is mental form. And there's also emotional form. We usually just think of physical form, but there's form. There's form at every level of being. So these three levels of expression all have form: physical, mental, and emotional form. So these develop. And along with the development of these particular capacities, there is a changing state of consciousness. The consciousness is changing. Now, the child initially is centered, that the consciousness of the child is centered in the physical form. This is why the child is rightly self-centered. There's nothing wrong with a self-centered child, because that's all his consciousness or her consciousness will allow them to be, is self-centered. Right? But at a certain age, the consciousness begins to change, and we can see various cycles that worked out. I mentioned the 9 months that worked out in the forming of the babe, and then usually around 12 years of age, there's a refocalization in consciousness. It's spoken of as the age of puberty. Some find that a hard time. I've been working with a young man of recent date that he's a very sweet young fellow, but there seems to be gaps in his expression. He has certain areas of his expression that, well, it just seems like there's no one home. There's just a big hole, right? And you'll talk to him, and when you talk to him and you hit one of these gaps, you kind of want to see if he's there. He is, but this gap is there. And I found it interesting just in working with this young man He seemed to be coming along very well, his father told me, until around the age of 12. Okay? And various things worked out at that particular time, which I'm sure has a part to play in the gaps with this young man. Most people think at the age of 12, all these changes that are taking place, they're taking place because of the changes that are going on in the physical body, particularly the endocrine system. Pubic hair begins to come in the development of the menses in the female and breast and everything else, all because of different hormonic changes that are taking place in the endocrine system. But actually, what is transpiring is a refocalization in consciousness. So that the child's consciousness is moving from being centered in the body here to beginning to be centered in the mind. Right? The consciousness is lifting up. Now, in this young man, at that particular time in the developing pattern here, his parents were in the midst of a divorce. And if it would have been just an easy splitting up, I suppose it would have been probably easy on the young boy. But from my findings, it was a riotous time between both these parents. Right? Well, here this young boy, you might say, was on a battlefield. Right? Actually, he was in no man's land. And the parents were shooting on both sides. So many vibratory factors which should have been there. Now we can see, for instance, in the development of the physical form, there must be a womb. Right? Now they're trying to do it with plastic these days. I don't think they're going to get too far. Right? There must be a physical womb there, and we know that that womb provides an atmosphere which is conducive to the proper developing patterns of the body. Right? Now, if that body is to develop, we must have a womb. That's absolute. Right? Now, that's birth at one level. And people, when they think of birth, like for instance, your birthday, right? They speak of your birthday. That's the day that you were supposed to have been physically born, right? Well, you need to be born mentally. You need to be born emotionally, spiritually. All these births need to take place. And at each level of these births, there must be a womb. There must be a womb. This particular young man, at that time, he didn't have a womb. He was in an environment of clash and chaos. So consequently, the thing that was required to allow the proper development of his mind wasn't there. So there are gaps in his mental apparatus. Now, one of the things that I'm working with is actually going back with this young fellow. I don't mean mentally going back and rehearsing the experiences that he has. Not that at all. That's a waste of time. Right? But I'm concerned in providing something that he didn't receive at age 12, or even before. Right? Providing a womb. These gaps that are in this young boy's mind will never be corrected until there is the womb which will allow the birth mentally to take place in that boy. Right? And there needs to be that atmosphere, something that he didn't receive at 12. Now, in order to do this, I'm not rehearsing with this young boy what needs to be done. He doesn't even know that I know what transpired at 12. Right? Doesn't matter. The thing is, I know what's required, and I know we won't get anywhere in helping this youngster. Right? Until we provide what's necessary at this time that wasn't done at that time. Right? Because if there is to be an emotional birth, which leads to a spiritual birth, which is a consciousness of who you really are, a consciousness of the being that you are. If there is to be that birth, there must be these births. We know, for instance, that the mind could not be born if the physical body wasn't born. We had to have that first. There are those human beings who like a spiritual birth. I have many who come to my lectures looking for a spiritual birth. It's impossible to have a spiritual birth without a mental birth. Right? Now, you don't tell the person that usually, right? Because most people don't realize that they haven't had a mental birth, that it's a lopsided thing, right? Primarily because the atmosphere required for it wasn't there. The nest of the home wasn't there to allow this to take place. When the mental birth takes place, and at this age of 12, there's a refocalization that begins to work out. This is why at the age of 12, the child should be given much more room. Right? If the work had been done in the earlier years, the child reaches a point where they begin to make some decisions. Right? They make some decisions. This young boy of which I am speaking, he is in no shape to make any decisions. Right now, you have to, in some aspects of his living, treat him like you would a 2 or 3 year old little boy. Right? Now, this is very important. What's required for the development of that mind, and I'm using as an example this young man, it's already there because being is there. He's alive. Everything that he needs is there. It's a case of providing the environment which will allow the design for his mind, which is contained in being, to begin to reveal itself at this particular level of his capacities. And from 12 to about 21, it begins to, that's the age. That's the age, between 12 and 21, where there should be the proper development of the mental capacity under the control of being. Under the control of being. Now, the mental capacity doesn't necessarily develop because you go to some educational institution. I have met many, many very, very immature PhDs. Emotionally, they're midgets. And yet they have all this education. And by the way, because they have all this education, they're even more dangerous. Okay? Because they haven't allowed this other development to take place. So the state of balance, they're imbalanced. Right? We see that many times in the so-called genius. The artists, some of the masters that we look back on, I mean, their expression of genius was put out on a canvas. It was beautiful. And yet, if you look at their own personal life, I mean, some of them were cutting off their ears and other things. A tremendous state of imbalance. Then from the age 21 until the age of 30, there would be the development of this particular capacity. I have emotional here. These things, of course, they work together as it's going along. The thing is, it's focused. There's various periods of focus as it comes along. At the age of 30, if all this process had worked out, allowing the design which is in being to work out, the person would come to the point where their consciousness would move out of these outer levels, so that their consciousness they would know and know that they know who they really are. They would be able to say, I am, and they would know who and what I am is. They no longer would be identified with these outer capacities. There would be, in that particular case, control offered to the capacities. You want the definition of a master from the dictionary? Or a master? A person having control. That's what a master is. Okay? And I think it interesting that we see mastery in many fields. Master plumbers, master electricians, all kinds of things in which mastery. And yet, when you begin to speak of mastery in living. Where are the life masters? Where are these who are masters in expressing this being? This being, by the way, is both male and female. There are male beings and there are female beings. This is why these capacities of the male being differ from the capacity of the female being. Viva la difference. Isn't it wonderful we have this difference? Right? Why do we have the difference? Right? Because the outer capacity said, I'd like to be a man. Now, we have this problem sometimes. Right? Sometimes little boys growing up want to be little girls. Little girls want to be little boys. Right? Wish I were a boy. They have all the fun. Right? They have problems later on, some of these kids who hold this to this particular thing. Because regardless of what you wish from this standpoint, you're going to be. You're going to be what that wants you to be. Okay? What do you think? I want to be a turnip. Oh no! You will be what the inherent design is. You will be a tomato. That's what it is. The design is here. These outer facilities, if the design isn't interfered with, will be what's inherent in that particular design. Now, we speak of genetic problems. Right? We see some physical conditions that are brought about genetically. Primarily because back along the way, in the development of certain aspects of the protoplasm, there was distortion because those back along the way were not being. I suppose we could call it the sins of the fathers and mothers. Certain genetic patterns were distorted back there, and they reflect here. But that design isn't here. That design isn't in being. That isn't the cause of it. Right? Not at all. Some of these genetic patterns need to be cleared. Some of these distorted genetic patterns, they need to be cleared. And the only way they can be cleared, and they can be cleared too. Right? So many people think, they have a certain pattern in the family, maybe a hemophiliac. Right? There's a pattern of hemophilia, right? And it's a genetic thing. And they say, well, I'm from a hemophilia line, and that's it. Nothing can be done about it. Well, don't you believe it? Being isn't the author of hemophilia. Right? That's because the patterns were loused up here. But anyway, at the age of 30, if the pattern was allowed to work out as it should, the person would come to the point of knowing who they are. First of all, they know that they're not their capacities. They know that they are being, and they know that the qualities of being are what they are. For instance, I would just put down some of the qualities. Life is one of the qualities of being. Truth and love. These are the qualities of being. We see on record, according to the record and the experience of the life of Jesus, he came to the point, he moved through all the cycles, right? Where he came to the point where he knew who he was, right? He knew that, right? And you might find it interesting that in the story, in the record of his particular experience, right? From the ages of 12 to 30, there's no record. There's no record of what transpired. Call it the silent years, right? Probably a good thing. Various things were working out, but in his own experience, he came to the point where this particular pattern of consciousness, he was born on earth just as you and I were. He went through everything just like you and I did. And he had a body and a mind and an emotional realm. And so many people think that when he was born, he was this little kid form. And then he knew exactly who he was when he He was a year old. No. That's ridiculous. He moved through everything. He moved through the whole pattern that we did. And we should. Right? The only thing is, he finally went all the way through to the point where, in his own experience, he said, I am. What? A body, a mind, and an emotional realm? No. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am love, truth, and life. This is what I am. This is what I am. And he knew that. And because he knew that, he was able to handle this. You can't handle that. You can't handle that properly if you're identified with that. That's what people are trying to do. They try to handle these capacities while being identified with them. You can't do it. What would you think if I took a wild horse and I sent him out into the mountains, we'll say, the mountains of New Hampshire? We released this wild horse. And then finally I found him after a couple of years. Here he was, a docile saddle pony. He trained himself to be a saddle. Do you think that'd work? Huh? Well, these capacities have been like a wild horse. We know something about that, don't we? Particularly that one, the emotional one. They've been wild. And if we're identified with them, well, we can't offer control to them. That horse, the wild horse begins to offer control, be brought to the point where it's trained, and a wild horse isn't of much value. It might look good watching it as it romps along the plains, but as for creative work, there's not too much value in a wild horse. The horse is of value because it's training. The human being is of value. These capacities are of value because they're trained. Right? And they do have a specific pattern of function once they are trained. But initially, of course, these capacities, as they're growing, the person's identified with them. This is where there is a need for some external help. Right? This is where parents come in. Right? With this young boy, 12. He didn't receive what he needed at 12. Now, he can't use that as an excuse. Right? Because if he says, well, I didn't get what I needed at 12. Well, maybe you didn't. Who did? Very few of us did. We probably got the best that they could give us, and we're thankful for that. Right? He didn't get it. Right? And he can't use that as an excuse, but right now, I have a responsibility towards him to provide something that he didn't receive at 12. And others, too, have that particular responsibility. First of all, he doesn't know how to control these capacities because he's identified with them. He's not identified with who he is. Right? But he needs to move through the process so that he is identified with who he is. But now there's a need for this. There's a need for that. And if it's right control, the control of being, it isn't something that's imposed. Love never imposes. Right? It's something that encompasses and enfolds, and this young boy needs enfoldment right now, and encompassment, so that we could do what? So that we can get him back on the track. Right? In the creative process is working out. Here it is, working out. So that this begins to transpire. What happens is this creative process that's working out, just as it worked out to develop the body, it was a creative process to develop this, so that we can come to know who we really are. But what happens is this, the creative process is working out. The pattern deviates. Right? So that most human beings, they find themselves under a ceiling. Right? Their consciousness has stopped at a particular level. Now, what's required is just to get the person back into the process so that they can start up again. Now, at this young man, at the age of 12, the tracks turned off. There was a yaw factor that took place. So we got to go back and allow the process that stopped at the age of 12 to begin to work out, even though he's in his 20s now, right? To begin to work out. We don't have to make it, it's already working. But he has to do certain things, and there needs to be an environment which will allow that process to begin to work out. Right? And as it works out, particularly because there's something being provided external, then the person may move through the point where they're knowing this. They're knowing stability, right? They're knowing consistency. They're knowing how to remain in the present, how to be right here. Because a person who's being, you can only be right now, a person who's being has let go of the past, right? And she is unconcerned about the future. Unconcerned about it. Right? Now this, again, I'm using this young man because it's right at point in my service. I know that he has certain feelings towards his parents. Right? I know that certain things were slammed into his little mind, particularly in resentment towards his dad by his unknowing mother. And his dad may have been way off the track too. I'm not taking any sides here. But I know he has resentment. Okay? Well, I know that as long as this young boy has resentment, he's off the track. Because that isn't a quality of the creative process. The creative process has very definite qualities. And in order to get in that process, the person has to be identified with these qualities. When you're identified consistently with these qualities, then you're in the process. Now, initially, he doesn't know how to do it. You might say, I represent the X. I represent this point of control to assist him to stay identified with the qualities of the creative process. Now, in working with this, according to his response, I might just mention this attitude that he has towards his father, that he needs to change it, that it isn't a proper attitude. It isn't an attitude which will allow the creative process to work out properly. And not only will it not allow the creative process to work out properly, but you can see what it does to his consciousness. He's resentful over something that his father did back there. So where is his consciousness? In the present? Oh, it's back there. Okay? It's back there. So this can be cleared very easily. Okay? Now, I know that initially he can't maintain himself in the creative process. He'll probably be ducking in and out. Okay? Nothing wrong with that. He's conditioned. His condition is to stay out. Okay? We need to begin to move through a new pattern which will allow him to stay in so that he can begin to allow these changes that are required. You know, it's an interesting thing about understanding. Okay? We all look to understand certain things. The only time you can understand something is here and now. This is the point of understanding right now. Right? And remember that. Right? What you need to understand is present with you right now. And you will understand it now. And you will understand what is required for right now. For right now. People are always interested in the things that they don't know. I don't know this. I don't know that. Well, wait a minute. Do you know something? Yes. All right. If you know something, then let's stick with the thing that you know. Forget about what you don't know. Right? Let the thing that you know, for instance, I just said something. I said something that if it permeated the consciousness of all of us here, it's the pearl of great price. I said that in the creative process, there were very specific characteristics. Okay? Now I mentioned resentment. Okay? I said that resentment is not a quality of the creative process. There are very definite qualities. Here are qualities of the creative process: love, and truth, and life. These are some of the qualities. And a person needs to be identified with these qualities to let this work out. The other night, I mentioned something which I'd like to just pick up here again by Dr. Lewis Thomas. You'll recall, those of you who have those of you who were there, Dr. Thomas is head of the Sloan Kettering Cancer Research Foundation in New York. It's considered the last word in cancer research. This is a very beautiful book by a beautiful man. He's speaking of that rare but spectacular phenomenon of spontaneous remission of cancer, which, he said, persists in the annals of medicine, totally inexplicable but real. A hypothetical straw to clutch in the search for cure. All right. Here's a person that has a cancer in their body. Okay? That cancer that's in their body does not come out of here. Being is not the author of cancer. Right? It's because the design that is in being isn't revealing itself through the body. Right? Cancer is nothing. Right? It's part of the shadow that Mark spoke of. It's the absence of something. Right? It's the absence of the true design of being. Now they have found in spontaneous remission that a cancer can be present in form. Now remember, regardless of the distortions that may be present in these capacities, the perfect design is here. It's already there. So here's distortion, we'll say a cancer in the body. And then they have a spontaneous remission. Now just think of this. As he goes on here and says, from time to time, patients turn up with far advanced cancer, beyond the possibility of cure. They undergo exploratory surgery. The surgeon observes metastases throughout the peritoneal cavity and liver, and the patient is sent home to die, only to turn up again 10 years later, free from disease and in good health. What happened? Isn't it interesting that no funds are being put in here? He said, this is the straw. This is the thing we need to clutch. And yet all the money in research is put in to let's burn up the body or cut it up or anything else. If there was just one case of spontaneous remission, that alone should be encouraging enough to begin to find out what was it that transpired in that spontaneous remission case. What happened? Let's begin to look at that. You can't look at that without taking being into the laboratory. They never take being into the laboratory. They take the body, and to some degree these other realms are pretty invisible though. Right? But they never take being into the laboratory. This is what needs to be taken into the laboratory, because you can't have wholeness. It's a human being. You can't have wholeness if you just look at half of the person. No more than you could find the answer to a problem, or if you didn't cover all the factors in the equation. These are the two factors, human being. And yet this isn't taken into the laboratory, and this is what he's speaking about here. There are now several hundred such cases in world scientific literature, and no one doubts the validity of the observation. But no one has the ghost of an idea of how it happens. That's why it happens. By the way, do you think a corpse will get well of cancer? Huh? No being. Right? But this is why it happens. I think it interesting, at this time with Dr. Thomas's book, right? This other book is out called Recalled by Life. Right? This is the story of a physician, Dr. Anthony Sadalaro. He was the director of the Methodist Hospital in Philadelphia. And it's the story of his recovery from cancer. He was given up. He had accepted the fact that he was going to die within a few months. And he was stumbling along the New Jersey Turnpike, and he picked up a couple of kids, hippies so-called, and they got into the car, and one kid got in the back seat, fell asleep. The other boys sat next to him, and they got talking. And this doctor opened up his heart to this young boy, and he told him that he had a cancer and he was going to die within a few months. The young boy said, "Oh, you don't have to die that." He said, "I don't." No, he said, you don't have to die of that. And then the young boy went into a particular diet which he felt could help the doctor, and the doctor went on the diet. And well, anyway, completely cleared. Everything's all gone. Right? He doesn't know what to make of it. Right? But yet, things just don't happen. Right? They just don't happen. Right? There were various laws that this man harmonized with. And because of his harmonization with the laws of being, because of his harmonization with it, then various things worked out. I'll just read a portion of they have on the back, which actually I think covers the whole book. If you want to copy this down, you don't have to buy the book. He said, so many months had passed since June 1978. So much had happened to me. And yet I had to wonder how much I had changed. There again, there's that word, change. There had been a whole change in his consciousness. Just an hour before, I was grabbing for my life, seeking the attention of God for more gifts. My cancer was the result of my taking and taking and taking until I had to ask for my very life. Selfishness is its own terminal illness. Now I wanted to live, and the only way to do that was to start giving. Well, this outer facility began to harmonize with what the inner being was already doing. Right? First of all, prior to that, it was trying to get. Right? When he changed his attitude and began to give, he began to be in harmony with being. Being is already giving. Right? I am being come to give life. This is what being is doing. It's giving. Mark made an excellent statement. He said that life gives its qualities to matter. That's right. This matter here, we'll say our body, it needs life's qualities. It needs life's qualities. Who's going to give it life's qualities? If a person is selfish, trying to get, that isn't life's qualities. Life isn't doing that. It isn't life's nature. The moment he started to give, he began to harmonize himself with what life was already doing. I think it interesting, recalled by life. Well, life didn't send him away in the first place. Life didn't say, cancer for you. And then life changed his mind. Now your cancer can be cured. No, not at all. He began to do what life was doing. He began to give the qualities of life to his body. And the moment he started to do that, contained in life is the design. So it all began to work out. He said, now I wanted to live. And the only way to do that, right, was to start giving. I could give for the rest of my life and not match all that had been given to me, especially the gift of these past 2 years. That was the greatest gift of all, to be handed back my life. Oh, what someone here? Life. Dr. Sadalaro, his life. No. He began to give life. As you give, you shall receive. He began to have more life because he began to give life. And there was no great mystery about the healing process that had taken place there. That worked out very, very easily. So these are things that we can look at today. We can be life masters. We can walk on this earth in strength and power and assurance, living in the present, offering control to our emotional realm. The author of events. The author of events. Whether one realizes it or not, they are always the author of events. Right? The thing is, the events that are going to transpire are going to transpire and take place according to the nature of your expression. If you're expressing the qualities of being, you will begin to bring events into your life that should be there. Beautiful events. Right? If we're expressing qualities of immaturity, qualities like this young boy, resentment, I mean, if you express those qualities, events are going to come. And they're not going to be too pretty. Because the author of the event wasn't too pretty. The author of the event wasn't creative. So in order for this to take place, we need to have some consciousness as to how this creative process works. Right? This word master or mastery. It's a word that, when it's used, it conjures up various things in consciousness that are fanciful, you know. But whether one knows it or not, they're always a master. They're either being mastered by their circumstances, or either they are mastering their circumstances. And the closest circumstances we have are these right here. Right? Human beings don't know how to handle these closest circumstances. These are our closest circumstances. Right? They don't know how to handle these closest circumstances, and they want to get beyond these here and handle their circumstances out here. You know, once these are handled properly, you find that these circumstances out here begin to change, begin to be what they should be. Right? But as long as the person isn't handling these properly, and as I say, we'll never handle them properly if our identity is with the capacity. You can't offer control to that which you're identified with. Right? It's only as our identity begins to emerge back to where it belongs so that we can begin to offer control. Now, as we go on here in these next 2 days, we'll look at some detail as to some of the things that we need to handle in the body and in the mind and in the emotional realm. Right? I mentioned a methodology. Right? Now there is. I don't want to make this sound mechanistic, but there is various steps, we might say. There's steps to mastery. Right? And these steps need to be taken, and we need to have some understanding of the step that we're taking. Right? So that we may deliberately move through the creative steps. And moving through it so that our identity is here, we offer control to this, and we find this begins to change. Now again, in my own service, some of the difficulties that we run into with people is the fact that they won't come into this creative process. Right? And one of the reasons they won't come into it is because they're all emotionally involved in their environment. That little card there, be willing to let yourself be happy, joyous, and gloriously successful. I would suggest that the average person, if you said to them, let yourself, we'll just say be happy, never mind the other two, joyous and glorious and successful. When you would mention that to them, be happy, they would look into their circumstances and see if those circumstances will allow them to be happy. Right? Of course, if you're doing that, you'll never be happy. Or maybe you'll have a fleeting moment on a Tuesday afternoon. I was happy for an hour or so. Happiness has nothing to do with it. I don't care what your circumstances are. Right? And people are always trying to lay the trip on you of how terrible their circumstances are. Right? I can't be happy or be joyous. Change my circumstances, then I'll be happy and joyous. No, you won't be. Right? Beginning to be concerned with the creative process, and part of the nature of the creative process is happiness and joy. It's already there. Right? Beginning to be concerned with being happy. Be happy. Right? Forget that out there. Forget all those things that you think are making you unhappy or restricting you, particularly people. That's always a good one. Certain people are stopping me from being happy. Right? No one is stopping us from being happy. When a person really sees the way this thing works, that happiness is a quality of being, and if you're alive, you have being, that happiness is there. And you may express happiness. Okay? And in the expression of it, you find that the circumstances begin to change. But there must be the consistency, as I say, so that we stay in this process long enough. We don't keep ducking in and out. Right? We stay in the process long enough so that what's required begins to take place. It's lots of fun, isn't it? Right? Just to realize, first of all, even if we haven't experienced it, or the degree that we do experience it, just to realize that it's there. Right? It's there. I recall working with a fellow one time, and he caught the vision. He caught the vision. He had some real problems. He had really gone off in a yaw factor. And then he caught the vision of the fact that everything that was required was there. It was all there. And I remember when he left my office that day, he was beaming. Okay? And about 15 minutes later, I got a call. He said, I realized something wonderful. I'm afraid to drive home now because I might get in an accident and lose it. He realized this. And it was such a wonderful revelation to him. He was afraid something would happen to him, that he would lose this wonderful vision which he had, which he didn't, by the way. He stayed in the creative process, and he's a very effective human being today. So I think we're getting to around lunchtime. We've made a good start this morning. And this afternoon, we're going to pick up. And, in these 2 hours that we have now, we're going to have a break. We're going to have lunch. This is part of our time together, too. Right? Elaine mentioned getting to know each other. Well, this is part of the thing, because I'm sure the fact that all of us were drawn here today, it just didn't happen. Right? Lines of force were going out to bring us here, just as it didn't happen that this particular substance is present in this tomato. Okay? This substance was amenable to the lines of force that were going out and was drawn to become part of the tomato. Okay? There was something of being going out even before we gathered here today. And it was those influences of being that went out that drew this particular configuration that we have here today. Right? You probably never find this particular configuration together again. Maybe it doesn't need to be together again. And who knows? But anyway, here it is, and it's something we can take advantage of it. And I emphasize this because we should take advantage of being with each other at this particular time. So we will have a break now and come back around 1:45, right?